Gianni Infantino called it 104 Super Bowls. That was his phrase, not a quiet private estimate shared in a boardroom, but a public declaration said with confidence, designed to frame what the 2026 FIFA World Cup would mean for the United States and for football. 104 Super Bowls, 6 billion viewers, a $30 billion economic windfall, the largest, most watched, most attended sporting event in the history of the planet. Those words were spoken at a time when the hotels were confident, the tickets were selling, and the promise of the biggest World Cup ever felt like something the numbers would confirm. That was the plan. That was the projection. That was what everyone from FIFA's president to the hotel associations in 11 American cities had built their summer around. Here's where things stand today, 26 days from kickoff. Nearly 80% of hotels across American host cities are reporting bookings below expectations. Not slightly below a typical summer, a summer with no World Cup at all. In Kansas City, that number rises to between 85 and 90%. Hotels in Boston, Philadelphia, Seattle, and San Francisco are describing this tournament not as the once-in-a-generation windfall they prepared for, but in the words appearing repeatedly in the American Hotel and Lodging Association's own formal report, as a non-event. Non-event. That is what the hotel industry is calling the biggest sporting event in history 3.5 weeks before it begins. The Visa bond situation, which had been building as a crisis for months, produced its first concrete response this week. On the 13th of May, the United States State Department announced it would waive the $15,000 visa bond requirement for ticketed fans from 5 qualifying nations: Algeria, Cape Verde, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Tunisia, provided they had registered through FIFA's priority appointment system before the 15th of April deadline. It is a real concession. For fans from those 5 nations who bought official tickets and registered in time, one of the most significant financial barriers to attending this tournament has been removed. But understanding what that concession actually covers and what it doesn't tells you a great deal about the scale of the problem it's trying to address. The visa bond policy applies to nationals of 50 countries. 5 of those countries have qualified for the World Cup. The waiver covers ticketed fans from those 5 if they use the official FIFA system, if they registered before April 15th, if they are otherwise fully eligible for a visitor visa, and if a consular officer approves their application after interview. It does not cover fans who miss the April deadline. It does not cover nationals of the other 45 countries still subject to bond requirements who aren't attending the World Cup but are affected by the same policy. And critically, it does nothing about the broader travel bans, full or partial, that currently affect nationals of 39 countries. Iran and Haiti, both of whom qualified for this tournament, remain subject to full travel bans. Their players and coaching staff are exempt under a separate order, but their fans, the people who would have saved for years, who bought tickets, who arranged time off work, are not covered. The exemption for athletes has always been there. The exemption for supporters has not arrived, and with 26 days to go, it shows no sign of coming. And then there's a category that affects the largest number of fans from the widest range of countries: the partial travel ban. 19 additional countries face restrictions that prevent the issuance of standard visitor visas. That list includes Nigeria, Angola, Venezuela, Senegal itself despite the bond waiver, Côte d'Ivoire in certain visa categories, and a range of nations from Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. These are not fringe football nations. Nigeria has one of the most passionate football supporter cultures in the world. Venezuela qualified for the World Cup for the first time in their history, and their fans are experiencing that historic moment from the outside, unable to obtain the visa they need to watch their team play. 65 to 70% of hoteliers surveyed by the American Hotel and Lodging Association cited visa barriers and broader travel concerns as the primary reason international demand has not materialized. Not ticket prices alone, not the format. The specific, concrete reality that tens of millions of potential visitors cannot obtain the documentation they need to enter the United States. That is the single biggest driver of the hotel crisis, according to the industry's own data. Here's where things get interesting in the way that reveals how this situation developed. FIFA's own decisions have made the hotel problem worse. In March of this year, FIFA exercised opt-out clauses in its contracts and canceled thousands of hotel room blocks across all 16 host cities. These were rooms that hotels had been holding for 2 years, set aside for FIFA officials, media, sponsors, and delegations. Hotels had structured their entire summer revenue models around the assumption that those blocks would be filled. When FIFA released them back to the general market at short notice, it flooded an already soft market with a sudden surge of available inventory. Prices that had been artificially elevated by the perception of scarcity dropped by as much as 40% in some markets almost overnight. Hotels that had been waiting for high-paying international guests suddenly found themselves competing for domestic short-break travelers at half the daily rate they planned for. The AHLA's report noted that FIFA's room block overcommitment created an artificial early demand signal that has since recalibrated. A careful way of saying that FIFA promised demand it couldn't deliver, and the industry is now paying the price. The ticket market tells a parallel story. According to data from Ticket Data, resale prices for more than 90% of all 2026 World Cup matches are currently falling. The average cheapest available seat has dropped 24% in a single month, from around $720 to approximately $560 now. For some group stage matches featuring smaller nations, seats are now available on the secondary market for as little as $160, down from over $600 when they were first listed in December. That last number deserves a moment. A ticket that was listed at over $600 in December is now available for $160. That is not a healthy market. That is a market in which the people who bought tickets as financial instruments, the brokers, the bots, the speculators who treated World Cup seats as investments, are now offloading inventory because buyers are not appearing at the prices they had planned for. And the cycle is self-reinforcing. Buyers see prices falling and decide to wait. Prices fall further, buyers wait longer. The floor hasn't been found yet. The irony embedded in all of this is significant. FIFA introduced dynamic pricing to the World Cup for the first time in 2026, using it to justify charging 6 times the historical average for the cheapest seats. The argument was that the North American entertainment market operates at these levels and that demand would support it. Football Supporters Europe, the continent's leading fan organization, was so opposed to this pricing that they filed a formal complaint with the European Commission, accusing FIFA of abusing its monopoly position to impose excessive ticket prices. That complaint was filed in March. By May, the same tickets that justified the dynamic pricing argument are being sold on the secondary market for less than a quarter of their original listed value. Now let's talk about what all of this means for the actual football experience. Because the financial story, the hotels, the tickets, the bond waivers, matters, but what it represents for the atmosphere inside those stadiums is what genuine football fans care about most. Think about what you remember from the World Cups that live in your memory. Not just the goals, the sound, the Brazilian sections at France '98, the orange waves of Dutch supporters in 2010, the English fans in Stuttgart and Frankfurt and every other German city in 2006, the Senegalese supporters in 2002 when their team beat France in the opening match of the tournament, one of the great World Cup upsets of the modern era. Those moments existed because the fans who created them were present. They had made the journey. They had found a way to be there. In 2026, many of those fans cannot be there. Not because they don't want to go, not because their teams haven't qualified, because the documentation they need to enter the United States either doesn't exist for their nationality or comes with financial conditions that make it practically impossible. The Senegalese fan who would have been in the stand for Senegal's opening match against Poland on the 15th of June may be there. The bond waiver helps, but only if they registered for FIFA Pass before April 15th, only if they can clear the consular interview, only if they applied early enough for the visa appointment, only if every stage of a complex multi-step process went right. The ACLU, Amnesty International and more than 120 other organizations issued a formal travel advisory for international visitors last month. Their message was direct. The deteriorating human rights situation in the United States, including increased surveillance, immigration enforcement activity, and the possibility of detention, represents a genuine concern for international visitors during this tournament. That advisory and the widespread media coverage it generated further suppressed the confidence of international fans who were already uncertain. The specific detail of what happened at the Winter Olympics earlier this year has not been forgotten in football circles. Reports emerged that immigration enforcement officers were deployed near the Olympic venues in Milan and Cortina. Protests were visible at the opening ceremony. The question of whether similar presence might appear near World Cup stadiums in American cities, a question that has been raised and not definitively answered, is one that fans from countries with complicated visa histories have taken seriously. What does this look like in practical terms for the tournament that begins on the 11th of June? The best realistic assessment is something like this. The matches at the Azteca Mexico City in Mexico City will be full, loud, and everything a World Cup opener should be. Canada's matches in Toronto and Vancouver will generate genuine atmosphere from a host nation playing in its first ever Men's World Cup, in cities with extraordinary multicultural populations that will represent dozens of nations simultaneously. Those venues will deliver. The American venues are more varied in their prospects. The stadiums near the southern border and in cities with large Latin American communities, Houston, Miami, Los Angeles, are likely to see strong atmosphere from domestic fans with deep football roots. The matches involving major European nations or South American giants will attract fans willing to pay whatever the market is asking. The quarterfinals, the semifinals, the final, those matches will draw regardless. It is the mid-table group stage matches, in the middle of the schedule, in cities further from the football heartlands, where the question of atmosphere becomes most acute. A match between two smaller nations in Kansas City or Seattle in a stadium that is 85% below booking expectations, with international fans deterred by visa complexity and domestic fans uncertain about the pricing, that match could feel very different from the World Cup experience that football has spent a century building. Whether all of this resolves in the coming weeks remains genuinely open. History shows that major sporting events can recover from slow buildups. Fans who have been waiting often find as kickoff approaches that the pull of the tournament is stronger than their hesitation. The football itself, the moments, the goals, the upsets, has a way of reassigning the narrative once it begins. But the data as it stands today, across hotel booking surveys, resale ticket prices, airline reservation numbers, and the formal reports of both the hotel industry and independent rights organizations, tells a consistent story. The 2026 World Cup is not arriving with the momentum that was promised. The world that was supposed to come has been partly deterred by costs, by complexity, by uncertainty, by documentation requirements that no previous World Cup has imposed on its own fans. The visa bond waiver of 3 days ago is the first concrete step toward addressing that. It is partial, it is late, and it carries conditions, but it exists. FIFA reportedly pushed for it in multiple meetings over several months. The industry association that has spent 2 weeks describing this tournament as a non-event is cautiously welcoming it. Progress, however incomplete, is real. What do you think? Is there still time for this tournament to recover its momentum? Or has too much been lost in the months of uncertainty leading up to it? I'd genuinely like to know. Leave it in the comments. If this kind of honest football conversation is what you come here for, no hype, just a real story told clearly, a like and a subscribe means a great deal. Every comment gets read. See you in the next one. 26 days. Whatever surrounds it, the football is coming, and it always has something to say that nothing else can.